There you go.
Oh my
Okay,
God.
here we go.
Look at me.
I can see you.
I'd like to call this meeting of the City of Laredo Historic District Landmark Board to order. It is May 13th, 2021, and it's 12:02 p.m. I'd like to call roll. District 1, Justin Huntsnutcher is absent. District 2, Robert D. Gonzalez, absent. District 3, Maria Elena Morales, appears to be absent. District 4, Cristina Davila Villarreal,
Present.
District 5, Wayne Nance,
Present.
District 6, Stanley Green,
Here.
District 7, Priscilla Iglesias,
Present.
District 8, Mark Gonzalez, Rebecca Sepulveda, present. I'd like to proceed to item 3, approval of minutes. Have you had the opportunity to review your packet, which contains the minutes of April the 8th, 2021?
Yes, I reviewed them and I move to approve.
I
The
second.
motion and a second to approve the minutes of April the 8th, 2021 as presented. All in favor, say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? Thank you. The minutes are approved. Vanessa, for citizen comments, do you have any people registered?
No, we don't have anyone registered, but don't forget that it does take a few moments for PAC from the time we put it on the screen to when it gets broadcast. So if we could just give them just a few minutes, a couple of minutes in case somebody does call in, but right now we have no one registered or on the line.
All right, so I'd like to take the opportunity then to welcome our guests. We have Laura Lee Willett and Maria Magruder from the Texas Historical Commission. Welcome to our meeting. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you so much for preparing this presentation for us. Would you like to say something to introduce yourselves?
Or hello, good afternoon, morning, whatever time means anymore. My name is Lorelei Willett. I'm the Certified Local Government Coordinator for the Texas Historical Commission. We are very excited to be here. This has been a long time in the making. We were really hoping to make a journey down to Laredo last year before all of this insanity happened. So we're very happy to meet with you virtually.
And I'm Maria Magruder, the program specialist, and yes, very excited to get to do this. Glad y'all are excited about a training opportunity.
Thank you so much. We don't have anyone on the line, so if you wish to proceed, we can move right along to the presentation.
All right, very good. Let's move on to item 5. I do see it says with possible discussion with possible action, but I don't believe any action is required. It's merely a presentation. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. Well, I'd like to invite our guests to make their presentation. Thank you.
Did you want me to put it up on the screen? The proposed presentation, or did you want to share?
Well, it says that participants can't screen share. So if you want to
Okay.
turn that on, I can.
Sure, let me get it up for you. Hold on. Apologies. I thought we were really prepared for this, but it doesn't seem so. Let's see if I can pull it up from.
Maria, you might also be able, I see something that says request remote control. I don't know if that's the same thing, but.
It might be. I don't think I see that on my end.
Did you send it to me, or did Lorelai, did you send it, or did Maria
Oh,
send it?
here we go.
I believe I sent it.
Was that you, Lorelai?
Yes.
Okay.
So Vanessa, I think under your security options,
Mm-hmm.
you can grant permission to share screen.
Hold on 1 second. It's requesting. Here we go.
Okay, let's see. Maybe now it'll work. It says I have control, I think.
Okay.
Oh, the screen share button went away when you gave me control. So I don't know.
Hold on. Well, let me get it. Let's see. I was almost there. It was you, Lorelai, that sent it to me then?
Yes. It looked like you found the correct email.
It looks like that was the one that she was sharing her screen.
Oh, is that Maria? Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, Zoom.
Can you send it to me again? For some reason, I'm not seeing it. Of course, when you're looking for something, you can't find it. Is it this? No, it's not this. Oh, I got it. Here we go. There it is. Are you all seeing it?
Yes.
Okay. And then we want to, let's see, view, normal, not like this. Just want to see it so it's just a regular slide.
If you click on your little very bottom row, there's one that kind of looks like a screen being pulled. Yeah, that one.
There we
There
go.
you go.
There we go. Presenter view.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry about that. As much as we prepared, still not prepared.
Yes, technology doesn't always want to work in our favor.
Yeah. All right. Well, with all of that, go right ahead.
Okay, so thank you for having us here. We're excited to do this. So we're just gonna jump right in. If you could go to the next slide. So we're gonna start out with an introduction to what preservation is. So for many people, they've never even heard of historic preservation. And so these are kind of some of the questions they ask. Why is it considered important? Is it about aesthetics? Is it something that the city should be regulating? What's expected of the property owner? So what are different responsibilities involved? So we're gonna address some of those. Next slide. So for us, historic preservation involves the act of recognizing places that are important to us. caring for those places by utilizing the most appropriate treatment, and then continuing to use them in ways that enrich our lives. And I also want to point out that historic preservation is much more than just the buildings that we work with. It's also landscapes, artifacts, cemeteries. So it's important to think beyond just the building. Next slide. But for y'all, usually your work focuses on the historic places and the structures, which are important because they represent cultural and architectural heritage. They establish a unique sense of community. They instill a sense of community proprietorship, enhances local property values, encourages tourism, and fosters economic growth and development. So a lot of really positive benefits to being involved in preservation in your communities. Next slide. So we're going to start out with a little bit of a timeline of preservation. One of the earliest historic preservation efforts was in 1853 when this woman on the screen, Anne Pamela Cunningham, created the Mount Vernon Ladies Association to save President George Washington's home, which had fallen into disrepair and was just about to be torn down. Her efforts to save the mansion was an important influence early on in the preservation movement, and it led to a lot of women with wealth being really active and prominent in preservation efforts. Next slide. So the Antiquities Act was one of the very first acts passed to address preservation, and it resulted from concerns about protecting mostly prehistoric Native American ruins and artifacts on federal lands in the west of the West U.S. There was a lot of plundering of artifacts from these lands by private collectors, and it had become a really serious problem by the end of the 19th century. So this act was passed that allows the president to set aside valuable areas for parks or conservation land that are known as national monuments. And currently there's 158, and there's only one in Texas. It's the Waco Mammoth, established by Obama in 2015. So first, local historic district should sound very familiar. That's what y'all spent a lot of time doing. So the very first one was actually created in Charleston, South Carolina in 1931. And in order to help regulate the district, the Special Committee on Zoning was created. And it later became the Planning and Zoning Commission. And to give the commission legal authority in 1931, the city adopted the Historic Preservation Zoning Ordinance and created the Board of Architectural Review. And this was such an effective method for preservation that in 1936, New Orleans followed and created the French Quarter. Next slide. So the Historic Sites Act of 1935, another big prominent act that gave the National Park Service the authority to organize all of the federally owned parks, monuments, and historic sites in the U.S. With this act, the U.S. was saying that historic preservation is a government duty, and the government has a responsibility to help preserve these historic places. Next slide, please. So the National Trust for Historic Preservation Act of 1949 was signed into law by President Truman, and it's it's established the National Trust for Historic Preservation, which objectives are to identify and act on important national preservation issues, to support, broaden, and strengthen organized preservation efforts, and to target communication to those who affect the future of historic resources. Next slide. So following World War II, the government pushed urban renewal programs that drastically changed the urban landscape in the U.S. And it primarily occurred in the 50s and 60s and included the interstate highway system. as well as the demolition of a lot of historic structures for new modern ones. And many people did not see this as a positive, and they began to protest this. One prominent example was the demolition of Penn Station in 1963. It was a major turning point during this time, and Penn Station was torn down to make way for Madison Square Garden. It opened in 1910 and was really well known and was just praised as a crowning jewel for New York. But when the plans to demolish it were released, a lot of people came together to fight for its preservation. And as a direct result of it being demolished on April 15th, 1965, Mayor Robert Wagner signed the Landmark Law, which created the Landmarks Preservation Commission. And for the first time, there was an agency with government power to designate and even save historical buildings and neighborhoods. Next slide, please. Which really helped lead to the passage of the National Historic Preservation Act of 1966, signed into law by Lyndon B. Johnson. And it established state historic preservation offices, also known as SHPOs, which help regulate preservation at the state level. And in Texas, the SHPO, the Texas Historical Commission, was created in 1953. So actually a little bit before then. Oh yeah, you're fine. There you go. In 1980, there was an amendment to the National Historic Preservation Act, and that established the CLG program. And the first CLG in Texas was El Paso in 1986. So here we have the different preservation organizations at every level. At the national level, we have on the government side, we have the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation and the National Park Service. And on the profit side, we have the National Trust for Historic Preservation and the National Alliance of Preservation Commissions, which help put on all of those camp trainings and forum, which happened this last summer. At the state level, you have the SHPA, so THC, and then you have nonprofit organizations like Preservation Texas, TDA, different ones like that. And then for y'all at the local level, you have your commissions, your preservation commissions, and then you have any kind of local advisory groups or historical associations. So now we're going to talk about the CLG program requirements, what it is y'all do to maintain status in the program. Next slide. So first thing is you have to adopt and maintain a local historic preservation ordinance that meets our standards, which y'all have done. You also have to maintain a historic preservation officer that helps facilitate all of this, which y'all also have. And you have to have a review commission, board, committee, which is what y'all are. So y'all are meeting the first 3 requirements right off the bat. Next slide, yes. So then you have to also enforce your local historic preservation ordinance, which y'all do through your COA reviews. Whenever you review applications, you're upholding your ordinance. And then you have to adopt the Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation to help use as a guideline for reviewing all of your COA applications. A lot of communities either strictly use the Secretary of the Interior standards, or they use a combination of the SOI standards and their own design guidelines or design standards. Number 6, you have to ensure public participation. Public participation is so important because everything you're doing is for your community, and if they are not aware of what you're doing for them, they won't be as passionate to support you. So it's really important that you let them know what you're doing and you involve them as much as you can. Next slide. Number 7 is to maintain a survey and inventory for the community. It's a really great way. We like to see the surveys done about once every 10 years. It helps identify any new properties that have become eligible for designation. And then your inventory is just your running list of the properties that are designated. Number 8 is to review and comment on any National Register nominations. We want to know what y'all recommend and what y'all think, so it's important that you're involved in the process. Number 9 is to monitor and report to us anything that's happening to your county courthouse, any RTHLs within your community, any SALs, and any locally designated landmarks, because a lot of times we need to know what's going on with those properties, and y'all are our eyes and ears on the ground. So it's really helpful when y'all are able to let us know what's going on. Next slide. Number 10 is to provide appropriate training, which is exactly what y'all are doing right now, and it's what we love to see. Because things are constantly changing and we're always learning new things, so we want to make sure that y'all are learning and staying up to date on everything going on in the field, so training is super helpful with that. And then the last thing is to submit an annual report. It's just a really great way to let us know what's going on in your community, things that you might have concerns with or issues with or want any assistance with. The annual reports really help with that, and it also helps us know where we need to focus our training efforts on. So it's really helpful when the annual reports get turned in on time, and they always are, so thank you. And that's all I have on program requirements. Now Lorelai's going to jump in and go into a little bit more detail on the commission roles and responsibilities.
Great, thank you so much, Maria. So I tend to talk fast. I'm gonna try and slow it down, but if I'm, going too much, then just, wave at me or interrupt me. No problem. So I am gonna talk a little bit about the commission roles and responsibilities. And first, I'm gonna introduce this kind of outline of what a commission and the historic preservation ordinance purpose is, just kind of overall. Something like this is usually, or like these 6 points are usually in the ordinance, just to kind of give commissions and the program kind of this guiding light, if you will. So number 1, protect and enhance landmarks and districts, which represent distinctive elements of your history, of your city's history and your architecture and your cultural heritage. 2, also foster civic pride in the accomplishments of your city, protect and enhance the city's attractiveness to visitors, and support stimulus to the economy, because there's a really deliberate tie, I feel, between history and a city's kind of economic and tourism impact and things like that. So 4, ensure the harmonious, orderly, and efficient growth and development of the city. So that's kind of where your certificates of appropriateness come in. Again, promote economic prosperity and welfare of the community by encouraging the most appropriate use of the property, and encourage stabilization, restoration, and improvements of such properties and their values. So those are just kind of things to keep in mind as you're going your responsibilities as commissioners. Next slide, please. So on your left is the kind of what the commissioners are. Again, this is on the left is really generalized. We have something called the Certified Local Government Handbook, which kind of outlines what Maria just talked about, the requirements of being a CLG, and also kind of what the base requirements of being in a commission are. So on our left side, we see commissioners are people with a demonstrated interest in historic preservation. Representatives could be from various fields, archaeology, architecture, planning, law, real estate, history, and a smattering of others. And also they don't have to, but they could be living in historic districts or local landmarks. So for Laredo, on the right, I pulled directly from your ordinance. It can be 9 members. Members are made up, of a resident of the city. Everybody has kind of demonstrated interest and competence or knowledge of preservation. Some of your professional memberships that you outlined are architecture, history, architectural history, planning, archaeology, things like that, that I think are all really important to commissions in general. And if we were in person, this is usually when I would like kind of go around the room and be like, which one are you? But you know who you are. A professional member of other disciplines, real estate, construction. I think having a construction expert is also really important if you have that kind of within your ranks. Banking or engineering, those can definitely bring really unique perspectives to a historical commission. And then I like that y'all have this also in your ordinance, that one member of the board shall attend a training basically from the Texas Historical Commission. That's a requirement again of being in a CLG, and y'all are meeting that right now. So next slide, please. Thank you. Again, on the left is pulled from kind of just a general idea of what commissioners can do. So Maria talked about conducting and administering historic resource surveys, recommending designations of districts and landmarks, also developing public outreach and education, because I think education in historic preservation is really, really important as you're trying to kind of fight for this history and saving your history within your city. You can also obviously provide design advice and other reasonable forms through the C of A process, and then also prepare or promote design guidelines for specific districts. And on the right, Laredo can also kind of make these recommendations to your Planning and Zoning Commission, your City Council, your manager, concerning the adoption of policies and the sources of funds, which I think is something interesting to look at, because I think incentives, incentivizing monetarily kind of historic preservation is also really important. Next slide, please. And these are just some other suggestions. Seek training, which y'all are doing right now, which is great. Either preservation related or diversity, equity, and inclusion sorts of training. Maria and myself have just kind of soft launched something called Preservation Bootcamp, which is all of this stuff, but really expanded. It's an online training on our website, and if anyone's interested, then please reach out to us. We can definitely send you the link. I also really encourage developing relationships with preservation groups. If Laredo has a nonprofit, the kind of responsibilities of a commission is to really educate, but not necessarily advocate, since y'all are this public entity. But if you have this kind of nonprofit arm, then they can be your advocacy group, which is really, really powerful within your preservation community. And then also for some of our other commissions who don't get a lot of design review, we encourage them to look continually at ordinances, look at design guidelines, look at that regularly to make sure that it feels like it's really reflective of what is happening in your community. And also you can form subcommittees to identify projects or historical resources. Next slide, please. Thank you. And I'm not going to go over all of these, but these are just some ideas about education and outreach. We updated them a little bit at the beginning of the pandemic for virtual or with proper social distancing. The use of like social media has really skyrocketed. Creating, things like an educational layer over a map has been really interesting. Creating a coloring book that you can either mail out or have places to kind of set up or pick up. So those are just a few kind of ideas. Next slide, please. Okay, so we are going to go over the Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation, and then I'm also going to discuss a couple of case studies with you. Go ahead. Thank you. So the standards, what you may or may not know is that there's actually 4 different types of standards. There's preservation, rehabilitation, restoration, and reconstruction. So preservation focuses on the maintenance and repair of a kind of existing historic material and just retaining it as it is right now. So think of think of the Colosseum. That's kind of, it's a ruin. They're not trying to build it back or anything like that. They're just keeping it kind of as is as much as they can. Rehabilitation is going to be the one that our commissions work with the most because it acknowledges the need to alter or add to a historic property to meet continuing or changing uses while retaining the property's historic character. So that offers probably the most kind of flexibility for things like local historic districts and local landmarks that are being kind of updated. Restoration depicts a property at a very particular period of time in its history while removing evidence of other time periods. So for me, that is something like a house museum. They're very focused on one particular type and very short kind of time period of that house. In reconstruction, we don't see a lot of reconstruction, but it's definitely something that exists. It recreates vanished or non-surviving portions of a property for interpretive purposes. So, if there's a really significant house that has burned down, I've seen that in other cities before. A destroyed property, basically, that is just rebuilt with new materials. Next slide. So we are, again, we're going to focus on the rehabilitation standards because this is the one, that's the standards that we encourage our commissions to adopt and to interpret alterations and certificates of appropriateness. So, so the way that this looks, the black text is really what the criterion states, and the red text is kind of our shorthand version. So you just kind of get like a quick understanding of what it is. So standard 1, it's choose an appropriate use, and by use I mean residential, industrial, commercial. If it's changing from like a restaurant to a coffee shop, then that's still commercial. That's not really changing its use. Standard 2 is preserve character defining features. And we always get a lot of questions about what really a character defining feature means, and that can be a hard question and a fair question. I encourage you to continue kind of like asking questions and talking to your staff, and we also have several resources that I think are good to have just kind of in your back pocket. One of them is Virginia McAllister's Field Guide to the American House, I think. And again, we can send you any sort of resources that you like. Number 3 is maintain true historic development. So each property will be recognized kind of as a physical record of its time. Changes that create a false sense of history or historical development are not recommended. So in a kind of example of that is putting maybe Victorian details, like that gingerbread that goes around the porches on a 1960s ranch style home. That's really messing up the historic development of it. In standard 4, considered significance of later changes, and again, that's kind of a tricky one. Changes to a property that have acquired historic significance in their own right will be retained and preserved, but there's always a question of what is historic. If there is an addition that was put on a 1920s house in the 1940s that's kind of falling apart, does that kind of create this sense of history? Is it historic? So that's definitely a discussion that a commission can have. Next slide, please. Standard 5, protect construction and craftsmanship. So to me, I think of craftsmanship as a good example of that is historic wooden windows. They are made of really dense old growth wood, so they are less resistant to rot and to bugs, termites, and they are made to come apart so you can repair them over and over again, rather than these newer windows that are made once, and then if they break, then you have to replace the whole window. And that kind of leads into standard number 6, which is repair rather than replace. Again, something like wood windows or wood siding. Wood siding, you can normally just kind of take out one board and then replace it with a new one, or if it just needs adjustment or something like that. So that's kind of what they're talking about there. For standard 7, avoid destructive treatments. And an example of this is, I always think of masonry, sandblasting paint, or really harsh chemical treatments that it's going to kind of take off that surface that is really protective of brick and of masonry. And then standard 8, we don't see that a lot, obviously, in historic districts or landmarks and things like that, protecting archaeological resources, but it's definitely something to think about, especially if you're looking at more kind of rural locations whenever you're looking at design review. Next slide. There we go, thank you. And standard 9, make alterations and additions compatible. Compatible is sometimes difficult to understand what that means, and there's a lot of different ways that you can do that, and that's a really good conversation to have kind of as a commission. And then standard 10 is really geared towards additions, making additions reversible. So that could mean a lot of different things. That could mean maybe putting a shorter kind of connector piece where you can visibly see the back of your historic house. Then there's kind of like this little hallway, and then there's the addition. So all that's kind of being destroyed of the historic house is kind of just a really small portion of the back wall. But if you eventually want to take off that addition, the house itself will basically be intact. So something to think about. Next slide. Thank you. So again, this is kind of just a list of a good kind of beginning set of resources. The National Park Service has made a series of what they call preservation briefs, and you can see all the different topics here, repointing mortar joints, roofing. They have one on wood windows and just wood and clay tile roofs and things like that. So if you in storefronts, I think storefronts are probably a really good one too. So if if you want to just like go in and poke around, they have a whole bunch of them. Some of them are a little outdated, but they're working on updating them. Next slide, please. Okay, so we are going to get just into a couple of examples. And what I want to point out on this slide is what you need as a commission before you start reviewing an application. So first is a complete application. You cannot believe how difficult it is to get a complete application. Sometimes, I'm sure you might know. Vanessa's like nodding her head. Yep. Totally get it. A complete application.
I mean, just for example, I had one application that came in last month, and I must have gone back and forth with that applicant about 40 emails clarifying, specifying, giving examples. It was like pulling teeth. It was really, and that's just one application, so it's definitely getting a complete application. You're right. It is very hard.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Go right ahead.
No, it's okay. No, I absolutely understand. So, hopefully, your city staff is really the muscle kind of behind getting that for you. But if you notice something as you're reviewing, don't hesitate to say, hey, we need this. To really make a good decision. So application, make sure you have your ordinance criteria and maybe the standards for rehabilitation just on hand so you have them in front of you and you can review them. Design guidelines if applicable. Not every community has design guidelines, but that's something else to think about. And then your staff report. Because I think staff is really able to process and digest this information before it comes to you, but it's something to think about. Next slide, please. So once you have all this, kind of the rough outline of what you should do as commissioners, you study your proposed drawings and the specs and the photos in kind of the staff report or the drawings, whatever they give you. Consider the staff recommendation because they've already kind of done this before. Review your proposed changes against the standards and any adopted design guidelines, and then we're going to go over kind of what that is going to look like here in a second. And approve, once you've kind of done all that and you've had your discussion and you've made your decision, approve or deny your proposed changes based on the standards, and explain your decision by citing the applicable standards or guidelines. And this is especially important if you are denying an application and it goes to an appeal. You need to make sure that you have all your ducks in a row and it says, well, the project didn't meet standard 2, 3, and 4. So that is really what your appeals board or your city council is going to look at. And then, like I said earlier, if you want to ask for more info or revised drawings, if the application packet is incomplete or you just need more information, and you can reschedule another hearing. I know it's difficult whenever you have somebody standing in front of you being like, I need a decision, but you are, I really want you to be empowered to say no, like, we are charged with this kind of responsibility, so you need to make sure that you are doing the best that you can with the best that you got. Next slide, please. So here is the first example. Windows are always a question, at least from the applications and the emails that we get at CLG. So there is a 1920s bungalow. They have a series of aluminum windows that are not original to that bungalow, and they are trying to figure out, well, what should I put in instead of the aluminum windows? So they come to you and they say, okay, I have all of these options, and so next slide, please. So they look at what the code language says. Code language says alterations must be compatible with what is typical in the district. And then if you have design guidelines could be a little bit more specific, saying all new windows must be or resemble wood. So that's helpful, but it doesn't say, like how many divided lights can you have. But looking around the district, there's kind of these 3 different window types that are present in the district. So the first one on your left is 1/1, and then 3/1, and then 2/2. And I'm saying that with however many panes are on the top and are on the bottom. Next slide, please. So next thing to think about is what kind of standards do you think that we need to look at? Which of the rehabilitation standards do we need to look at? And for myself, and you definitely do not have to agree with me. This is just kind of my own thought process. I would think number 1, number 2, number 3, 4, 5, and 9. So next slide, please. And then what you do is you take your application and you start putting those pieces towards the criteria. So number one, does the alteration maintain its use as a residential structure? And changing out the windows, yes, it does. Is the character retained? And for me, you know, for the most part, the overall form of this one-story house, the porch is staying. Like you can look at it, even with aluminum windows, and say, you know, it's still basically remaining the same. So so I say yes. The alteration of replacing the windows retains that character. Now, number three gets a little sticky. We talked a little bit about that false sense of history, you know, sticking on Victorian details onto like a ranch house. Do any of those three window options create a false sense of history? And the answer is maybe. The A and B, that 1/1 and 3/1, those are definitely 1920s, but B is probably a little bit on the fancier side with those three lights on top and just one and one on the bottom. And then C, the 2/2, is definitely more of a Queen Anne style, which is earlier than this 1920s kind of simple bungalow. So, you know, so right now I'm thinking maybe C is not the best fit. So 4, did the aluminum windows acquire historic significance? And for myself, I would say no, but that's definitely a conversation that you might have within your commission, because, you know, they could have been put in the 50s, they could have been in the 60s, they could have been in the 70s, and there's kind of this idea that a 50-year mark is considered historic, but that's not always necessarily the case. So that's something, you know, so for me, I don't think that the aluminum windows have acquired their kind of historic significance on their own. 5, are the aluminum windows a mark of craftsmanship? And I don't know if anyone has ever tried to tried to like mess with an aluminum window or anything like that. I would say that they are not, unless they're very fancy. So I would say that they're not a mark of craftsmanship, and they can be taken out. And then 9, are the aluminum windows historic? No, we looked at that in number 4. And do the new windows destroy that history? Since they're not historic, no, they don't. So so for the most part, the entire project of taking out the windows and putting in something else meets the criteria, but where we get stuck is what kind of window. And so again, I'm looking at number 3. I took out a criteria number 3. I took out option C, which is kind of the more Queen Anne window. And for me, especially if I don't have any sort of documentation, there's no historic photo or anything of that house from when it was built, I go with a more simplistic option, which is that first option of 1/1. Can you go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So that's what we end up with, and this is what the house looks like. You know, it's I think a 1/1 window looks appropriate in there, definitely more appropriate than the aluminum windows, and now the owner is happy that they have new kind of historically appropriate windows. Next slide, please. Okay, and this is our last example. It's a little bit more complicated. So what is happening is someone has bought this commercial property, and they are wanting to do some updates. But this one actually does have a historic photo. So whenever I'm so excited when I get historic photos, because then you can kind of look at it and be like, okay, where are all the differences? You know, has it changed that much? So here I'm just kind of looking at what's existing and what the historic photo is. And really not a lot has changed. Obviously the transom windows have either been boarded or bricked up, storefront has been taken out, and that has, but for the most part, the whole form and shape of the building is still present. Next slide, please. So what is being proposed is this, and I'll just kind of list out what is happening. They are raising that parapet roof a little bit taller. They are enlarging the columns on the sides and in the middle. They're replacing the brick. They're replacing the storefronts. They are adding an awning, which looked like it probably had at some point, even though it's not in the historic photo. And they're also adding ephes, which is kind of that like fake stucco. Next slide, please. So what kind of information may you need? This is something to kind of think about. You might have the application in front of you. Maybe it's not entirely complete, but this is definitely something to think about as you're going through it. And then always also which standards would apply, and then you interpret the project against those standards, and then you can form a motion. Next slide, please. So these are just kind of some examples of what kind of information I think I might need if I was commissioner and I was reviewing this application. What is happening to the masonry? Are they taking all of the brick off? Are they just adding more brick? Like, what is happening? And then also how much taller is that top than the original kind of one story? And then which standards would apply. And you don't have to agree with me. Again, this is almost all of them except for that number 8, which is that archaeological standard. So, and then since you kind of identified your standards, then you interpret the project against it. Next slide, please. So number 1, does the alteration maintain its use, which is it's a commercial property. It's maintaining its use as a commercial property. So yes. Is the character retained? For me, that kind of really simple one-story commercial kind of unit, that look and feel of that original property is not being maintained by all of the different changes that are happening. Do any of these create a false sense of history? I personally absolutely think so, because the original, even in its kind of altered state, it looks older, but it now looks very new. And kind of that developer, that kind of big box store look, it now looks very new, and the whole look of it has changed. So 4, have the other alterations acquired historic significance? No, the storefront is metal, like that's been taken out. Doesn't have any historic significance. Are there distinctive features of historic craftsmanship? Again, no. Do the alterations repair the existing features? No, you're actually losing your transoms and your kind of like overall form. Are the treatments destructive? As we talked about, yes, they are taking out, it looks like they are taking out brick and they're putting on this kind of fake stucco situation. So, what is that going to look like? And are the alterations compatible? The rest of the block is kind of really similar to that property. It's just kind of this one story, really kind of nondescript commercial property, and with this alteration, it's kind of like this boxy. So I feel like the alterations are not compatible. And then 10 was kind of specifically for additions, and to me, adding on that height of a parapet is considered an addition, and is also not reversible. So overall, it didn't do great looking at the project versus the standards. Next slide, please. So I would say, except for number 1, it did maintain its commercial use. So I would say that the project does not meet 2, 3, 5, 6, 7, 9, and 10. So as a commissioner, I would make sure and put that in my motion, and I would say I move to deny the application for the address 108 East Mountain Street. because the application does not meet standards 2, 3, 5, 6, 7, 9, and 10 of the Secretary of Interior standards for rehabilitation. So again, and then, if it's seconded and put into the minutes, that's going to be really important in case the applicant goes to an appeal, so that the conversation can be focused on the standards. So that was a lot. Really appreciate y'all letting us talk to you a little bit. Let us know if you have any questions.
Thank you so much, Lorelai and Maria. We really appreciate it. It was extremely comprehensive. I know I enjoyed it tremendously. And it gives us a lot of good resources. So I know we'll be working with you in the future to do more trainings. We definitely want to make this a much more regular activity. I guess we'll go back to the regular agenda.
Well, Vanessa, are the members going to be allowed to ask questions?
Absolutely. Pardon me. Go right ahead.
Do we have any questions from members?
No,
I know I have.
I just wanted to say thank you. It was a very good and thorough presentation, and we appreciate your time.
Absolutely. Thank you.
I know I have many questions, but I wonder if there would be an opportunity then to have like a second session with maybe specifics that relate to our ordinance and the way that we interpret our responsibilities, because I think it would take much longer and members are on their lunch hour. And so I don't want to take a lot of time, but one that kind of encompasses some of the questions could be, we've been told by staff that the Secretary of Interior standards are only guidelines and suggestions, and that they are not standards for us. And so, you gave the example about how this one application was denied because it did not meet the following standards. We are not doing that. We are just looking at the standards as, oh, it would be nice to have this integrity of the building, etc. And I think that we probably need to clarify that. And if that's not clear in the ordinance, then maybe we need to change the wording of the ordinance so that there is more specific tasks given to the role of the board.
We can certainly consider working with Lorelai and Maria on a follow-up session at some point whenever it's convenient in their schedule, and maybe if you don't want to have questions now, maybe we could have them sent in and we can forward the questions to them so that they could start thinking about what the commission is interested in.
Okay.
Just to clarify a little bit, the Secretary of the Interior standards are kind of like the ideal, perfect scenario of this is what we would love to see, but you really have to take them and apply them on a case-by-case basis. So they're going to look different. People are going to interpret them differently, but that's kind of to help streamline it and try to make it a little bit easier. Those were created, but they're not perfect. They're not going to fit every single property specifically. So you kind of have to interpret them for each building. And then you use what your community has, your design guidelines and standards with that.
Well, I think we're also ignoring many of our design guidelines because they were written so long ago that over time we have given them less importance in our decision making. So we probably need to review those as well, and perhaps uh, you can help us. Is there any opportunities for consulting on, for example, design guideline reviews or ordinance reviews? I know our ordinance is under amendment right now, and I wonder if you are involved with that, can be involved with that, because I'd like to pose a question to Vanessa in the next item, but I do feel that there needs to be more clarification in the ordinance.
Well, that's correct, Ms. Sepulveda. We are in the process of rewriting all of our land development code, and that does include our historic guidelines, our historic rules and laws. So we're in the midst. We just started this morning with staff review of the new code. So I would suggest that we look at, we're going to have an extensive series of public outreach. We're going to go to the Builders Association, to the council, to the Planning and Commission. So there's going to be a ton of outreach on the code, but right now it's still under staff review. So we're definitely going to be going out to, our, going out to the public to review the code in depth.
Okay, very good.
And Vanessa, I know we had talked a little bit about some of that code development. Since Laredo is a certified local government, and Maria was talking about the kind of requirements that need to go into that. There are kind of really specific things that need to be included in the ordinance. So we are very happy to kind of review it against those standards to make sure any changes are still going to make sure it doesn't knock you out of CLG status.
Sure. What I would assume is going to happen is we'd probably at some point send you the link, and actually it's on our website right now. The draft code is on our website. I can send you the link to it so you can take a look at what they're proposing, but just be aware that it may change, because again, we're still under staff review. We're still haven't gotten everybody's comments. We imagine that the development community is going to have a lot to say about it. The public will have a lot to say. Our elected leaders will have a lot of input into it. So just today we were making, significant changes to it. So if you want to just take a look at it, I can send you the link, but it is on our website. And but again, it will change from today to the final version.
Vanessa, just to clarify, you're talking about the larger City of Laredo Land Development Code.
That's correct.
Because the part of the code that deals with a landmark board that was amended has already received City Council approval on first reading.
A portion of it, yes.
Oh, well, I thought that was all that was going to change.
Well, we're talking about two different things. We're talking about the existing land development code, of which there was an amendment, but then we're talking about recode, which is the rewriting of all of the land development code, which is a complete update.
Right. So as far as the landmark boards, the ordinance that relates to the Historic District Land Board, that has already been approved by council. And for the benefit of members that are still logged in, there is the recommendations that our board made were not approved and are not included in the language.
That the ordinance amendment will be going for final reading at this next meeting. You're correct. So and that was sent to the Historical Commission, and they did provide their comments.
Which Historical Commission?
Lorelei and Maria reviewed the ordinance, ordinance amendment.
Okay.
Yeah, that's one of the things that we do is we help y'all with technical assistance. So we'll help review ordinances and we'll help review design guidelines.
Yeah, and they did review this ordinance amendment that you're referring to. That's going to go for final approval on at the next City Council meeting, and we'll also make sure to get them involved in the review of the new code.
Okay. Well, I've still got, feel that the purpose of amending the ordinance was to clarify it for the sake of the public. And I still feel it's not clear. For example, in it, it says that items which alter the appearance of a building, items that do not alter the appearance of a building don't require board approval, and those that do not require a building permit. So is it and or? Are those exclusive?
Well,
How do you,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I don't understand. How do you explain that to the public?
What we can do is, that item is not a part of the current agenda, but what we can do is, if you'd like, I can discuss it with you, by phone. We can look at the ordinance and I can answer all your questions that you may have.
Okay.
I have a quick question kind of to add to that for Maria. As far as CLG goes, we're supposed to have, a review commission, the landmark board. And if we're meeting on a monthly basis and trying to update our ordinances and our guidelines, and we vote on something unanimously, and what we voted on is not what is presented to planning and zoning, maybe city council at the very end. Is that falling in line with CLG? Because what's the point of having us there? We're going to vote on something and a recommendation is being put forth, but then the final, what is being presented by staff to city council is not in line what we voted on.
Maybe I can speak. I'm sorry if you want to get their answer, but I can speak to that just a little bit. The way that normally things are presented to council is staff develops their own report and we present the commission's recommendation. So we did present that similarly to when Planning and Zoning Commission does not recommend approval of, let's say, a zone change, we make sure that, we have staff's recommendation and we have the Planning and Zoning Commission's recommendation. Many times they're not in concurrence, but we do make sure that both of those are listed on the staff report. With regard to the ordinance amendment, it did have staff's recommendation, it had the Planning and Zoning Commission's recommendation, and it also had the Historic Commission's recommendation on the item. So if you look on the staff on it said Planning and Zoning Commission recommended approval without change. Historic Commission recommended approval with changes, and staff, recommended approval without changes. So there was, your recommendation was presented to council.
Well, the whole point of the way that we voted into, like Ms. Sepulveda said, was to clarify a little bit more, because when you say that you don't have to go to historical review just because you don't require a permit, that just opens up to decals on windows and a lot of other things like putting down tile on a front porch that doesn't necessarily go with the building. So yes, I agree with what Mrs. Sepulveda is saying. Is it an and or an or? Because the way that it reads right now, I think is very vague and pretty much opens up a can of worms. It's something that we're going to have to review and either re-amend and bring it back to council, because it is just so vague. I think we took 2 steps back on the way that ordinance was written.
I agree. Well, I'd like to have an item with possible action on the next agenda regarding that, if we can do that. And also,
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
I would also like to send out a link to this meeting recording, if possible, to our members, so that everyone who is absent has an opportunity to review the presentation, and also those of us that participated get a chance to go back and review what was presented, and offer the members an opportunity to propose questions to THC staff regarding the presentation.
Will do.
Great. I know you're so busy because now you have many more hats to wear, right? And
That's
you've got
correct.
a committee. Yes. So I do value this opportunity, and thank you for doing this for us, Vanessa. And I thank the members of the Texas Historical Commission that were on the call to present. I know you're busy and you've got people all over the state that need your time, and we're very grateful.
So next item on the agenda is director's comments.
Yes.
Kirby is, again, I thought he was going to be able to be with us, but it looks like he was detained a little bit longer. So on behalf of him, I know he wanted me to extend his thanks and his gratefulness for being able to work with you all. He enjoyed it. He learned a lot. It was his honor to have served the city of Laredo and the planning of the Historic Commission. And other than that, we wanted to thank you for your service. Once again, you know, we always want to thank our members. We understand your time is valuable, and you know, you do this voluntarily. And this is, you know, this service is invaluable, and we want to make sure that you know that we appreciate it. So with that, we come to the last item, adjournment. So thank you very much, and we can just adjourn, or if you'd like, we can just go ahead and adjourn the meeting now if there's nothing else.
Yes, that's fine. Thank you very much.